In a busy office buzzing with activity, everyone was on edge. Word had spread like wildfire that there would be an emergency meeting in the conference room at 3 p.m. sharp. The air was thick with tension as employees filed in one by one. Some whispered, nervously, about layoffs. Others speculated it might be a merger or even worse, a hostile takeover. No one knew for sure what was coming, but they all agreed it couldn't be good. The clock struck 3, and just as people started settling into their seats, the door creaked open. Everyone turned to look, expecting to see the CEO stride in confidently, ready to drop whatever bombshell awaited them. But instead, it wasn't the CEO who walked through the door. It was the janitor. Yes, the janitor. She pushed her mop bucket aside gently and stepped into the room, her work uniform slightly worn but clean. Her presence stunned everyone into silence for a split second before murmurs erupted around the table. "What is she doing here?" Someone snickered from the corner. Another rolled their eyes dramatically, clearly thinking this was some kind of joke. A few stifled laughs echoed across the room, but she didn't seem fazed, not even a little bit. Instead, she calmly pulled out the chair at the head of the table, the one reserved for the big boss, and sat down without hesitation. There was something oddly commanding about the way she carried herself. It wasn't arrogance exactly, but more like quiet confidence. Still holding on to her mop handle, she placed a stack of papers neatly in front of her and looked up at the room full of shocked faces. For a moment, no one said anything. They just stared, trying to make sense of what was happening. Was this some prank orchestrated by HR? Or maybe the janitor had accidentally wandered into the wrong room? Either way, most people assumed she'd leave soon enough once she realized she didn't belong there. But then she spoke. "I know you're all wondering why I'm here," she began, her voice calm yet firm. The room fell silent again. People exchanged glances, unsure if they should laugh or take her seriously. After all, how could someone whose job involved cleaning floors possibly have anything important to say during a high-stakes corporate meeting? She continued, ignoring the skeptical looks aimed her way. "Let me start by saying this isn't a mistake. I've been asked to step in temporarily as your new leader." At first, the words didn't register. Some people blinked in confusion, while others leaned forward, waiting for the punchline. Surely this was some sort of elaborate prank, right? But when no one jumped out yelling, "Gotcha!" the room grew quieter still. You could almost hear the gears turning in everyone's minds as they tried to process what they were hearing. Then came the whispers. Did she really just say that? One person muttered under their breath. Another shook their head, muttering something about how ridiculous this whole situation was. Someone even laughed outright, earning a few nervous chuckles from nearby colleagues. Yet despite the growing disbelief, she remained composed, her expression unreadable. Finally, someone mustered the courage to speak up. "Look," a senior manager said, his tone dripping with condescension. "We appreciate your enthusiasm, but let's be realistic here. This isn't exactly your area of expertise." His comment drew nods of agreement from others around the table. Clearly, they thought this whole thing was absurd. How could someone who spent her days mopping floors suddenly claim to lead a multi-million-dollar company? It seemed impossible, laughable even. But the janitor didn't flinch. In fact, she smiled faintly, almost as if she'd expected this reaction. Without saying another word, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Placing it carefully on the table, she slid it toward the center so everyone could see. "This is my authorization from the board," she explained simply. "They've entrusted me to oversee things until further notice." Now the atmosphere shifted completely. What had started as amusement quickly turned to unease. People glanced at each other, unsure of what to do next. Could this actually be real? Had the janitor somehow managed to pull off the ultimate power move? As questions swirled in their heads, one thing became clear. This meeting was about to get very interesting indeed. As the janitor placed the letter on the table, the room went eerily quiet. People leaned forward, their curiosity outweighing their skepticism for the first time. The senior manager who had spoken earlier hesitated for a moment before picking up the paper. His eyes scanned it quickly, and his face changed from smug disbelief to something closer to panic. He passed it along to the person next to him without saying a word, but the tension in his shoulders said enough. The document made its way around the table, each pair of eyes growing wider as they read. It was real, signed, stamped, and official. The board had appointed her as interim CEO. Gasps and murmurs began to ripple through the room again, but this time there was no laughter. Instead, confusion and unease filled the air. When the letter finally returned to her, she folded it neatly and tucked it back into her pocket. Then she spoke again, her voice steady and calm. "I know this is unexpected," she said, looking directly at the group. "But I'm not here because of some personal ambition or hidden agenda. I'm here because this company needed someone honest enough to step in when everyone else failed." Her words hung in the air like a challenge. No one dared interrupt her now. She took a deep breath and continued explaining how she'd come to be in this position. Over the years, she explained, she'd seen things most people didn't notice. Late nights spent mopping floors gave her a front-row seat to conversations executives thought were private. She'd overheard deals being struck in hallways, arguments, behind closed doors, and secrets whispered in hushed tones. And she hadn't just listened, she'd paid attention. "I've been watching this company fall apart for years," she said, her tone firm but not unkind. "While you all focused on bonuses, promotions, and making yourselves look good, the foundation of this business was crumbling. Mismanagement, lies, and greed, they've eaten away at everything that once made this place successful." She paused, letting her words sink in. Some people shifted uncomfortably in their seats, avoiding eye contact. Others looked defensive, as if ready to argue. But she wasn't done yet. "For too long, employees have been treated like disposable parts of a machine," she went on. "People work hard here, day in and day out, only to be ignored or taken advantage of by those at the top. Meanwhile, some of you have been lining your pockets while cutting corners and breaking rules. You've created a culture where fear and dishonesty thrive, and it's cost this company more than money. It's cost trust." At this point, the atmosphere in the room felt heavy, almost suffocating. A few people exchanged nervous glances, while others stared down at their hands, unwilling to meet her gaze. One man cleared his throat awkwardly, but no one dared speak up. Then she reached under the table and pulled out a thick folder. Opening it, she revealed pages upon pages of evidence, emails, financial records, internal memos, all meticulously organized. "This isn't just my opinion," she said, tapping the folder lightly. "These are facts. Every single one of these documents proves wrongdoing at the highest levels of this company. Fraud, embezzlement, unethical practices. I've documented it all." Now the room was completely silent, even the air seemed to freeze. People glanced nervously at each other, wondering which of them might already be implicated. For years, they'd operated under the assumption that their actions were invisible, protected by power and privilege. But sitting before them was someone who had seen it all and recorded every detail. One of the executives, a woman known for her sharp tongue and sharper suits, finally broke the silence. "Even if what you're saying is true," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "you can't possibly expect us to believe the board would hand control of this company to you." Her tone dripped with disdain, though it lacked its earlier confidence. The janitor smiled faintly, almost sympathetically. "Believe it," she replied, "because I didn't ask for this role. The board came to me after reviewing my findings. They realized they couldn't trust anyone else to clean up the mess you've all made." Her answer sent another wave of shock through the room. Realization dawned on their faces. They weren't dealing with an amateur or a jokester. This woman had played her cards carefully, gathering proof over years until she had an undeniable case. And now she held all the power. She stood up slowly, gripping the edge of the table with both hands. "Tomorrow morning," she said, her voice rising slightly, commanding attention, "auditors will arrive to review every aspect of this company. Until then, consider yourselves suspended pending investigation. Any attempt to tamper with records or interfere with the process will result in immediate termination and legal action." The finality of her statement hit like a thunderclap. No one moved. No one spoke. The weight of her authority settled over them like a storm cloud, impossible to ignore. For the first time, they understood. This wasn't just a meeting. It was the beginning of a reckoning. And none of them were prepared for what came next. The room was dead silent after her announcement, the kind of silence where you could hear the hum of the air conditioning and the faint rustle of papers shifting nervously in someone's hands. Eyes darted around, searching for a way out. Literally, or figuratively, but there was none. The janitor stood at the head of the table, her presence now impossible to ignore. She wasn't just some invisible figure who cleaned up after them anymore. She was the person holding their futures in her. As for a moment no one said anything. Some looked down at their laps, avoiding her gaze altogether. Others exchanged uneasy glances, silently asking each other what they should do next. A few tried to put on brave faces, but it was clear they were shaken. One man, a tall guy with slicked back hair and an expensive watch, cleared his throat loudly, breaking the tension. "This is insane," he blurted out, shaking his head. His voice wavered slightly, betraying his attempt to sound confident. "You can't just walk in here and start throwing accusations around. Who do you think you are?" His words hung in the air like a challenge, but instead of backing down, she met his stare head-on. There was no anger in her expression, only calm determination. "I already told you who I am," she replied evenly. "And as for my accusations, they're not baseless. Everything I've said is backed by evidence." She gestured toward the folder still sitting on the table, its contents spilling out like secrets waiting to be exposed. "If you'd like, we can go through it together right now, line by line, name by name." Her tone was matter-of-fact, but there was a subtle edge to it, a warning that she wasn't bluffing. The man hesitated, his bravado crumbling under her steady gaze. He opened his mouth to argue further but thought better of it. Instead, he slumped back into his chair, defeated. Around him, others began to fidget uncomfortably, realizing they were trapped. There was nowhere to hide, no clever excuses that could undo years of bad decisions. One woman leaned forward cautiously, her voice trembling as she spoke. Even if all of this is true, surely there's another way. We can fix things. This doesn't have to end like this." Her plea was desperate, almost pleading, but the janitor didn't soften. "Fix things?" she repeated, raising an eyebrow. "How many times have employees come to you with concerns only to be ignored? How many corners have you cut to boost profits while ignoring the damage it caused? And how much longer did you think you could keep getting away with it?" Her questions landed like punches, leaving the group speechless. They had spent so long operating behind closed doors, believing their actions were untouchable, that they never imagined being called out so publicly or so thoroughly. The realization dawned on them slowly. They weren't facing a slap on the wrist. This was a full-blown reckoning. But then, predictably, came the attempts to save face. Another executive, a wiry man with glasses perched on the edge of his nose, spoke. "Look," he said, trying to sound reasonable. "We understand your frustration, but maybe there's room for compromise. Perhaps we can work together to—" "No," she interrupted firmly, cutting him off mid-sentence. "There's no compromise here. Not this time." Her voice carried a weight that silenced any further protests. "You've had years, decades, even, to prove yourselves capable of leading this company responsibly. Instead, you chose greed over integrity, shortcuts over hard work, and lies over honesty. That ends today." With that, she reached into the folder and pulled out a single, sheet of paper. It was a list of names, everyone sitting at the table, written in bold letters. Next to each name was a summary of their misconduct, concise but damning. She slid the paper across the table, letting it stop in front of the group. "These aren't just mistakes," she said, pointing at the document. "They're patterns of behavior that have hurt this company, its employees, and its reputation, and I won't allow it to continue." A collective gulp seemed to ripple through the room. People glanced at the paper, then quickly looked away, unable to bear seeing their misdeeds laid bare. For the first time, they understood the depth of her preparation. and the impossibility of escaping her net. Still, old habits die hard. As the reality of their situation sank in, desperation took hold. One man, red-faced and sweating, leaned forward abruptly. "What about loyalty?" he demanded, his voice rising. "We've given years of our lives to this company. Doesn't that count for something?" She looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she sighed softly. "Loyalty isn't measured by how long you stay somewhere," she said quietly. "It's measured by how well you serve the people who depend on you. And from where I'm standing, you failed them." Her words struck a nerve, silencing the room once again. The fight drained out of them, replaced by resignation. They knew they were beaten, not by force but by truth. Slowly, reluctantly, they began to accept that their reign was over. As the meeting drew to a close, she stood up, gathering her papers. "Tomorrow, external auditors will arrive," she reminded them. "Until then, don't make things worse for yourselves. Go home, reflect on what's happened, and prepare for what comes next." Without another word, she picked up her mop bucket and walked toward the door. The sound of her footsteps echoed in the stunned silence, punctuating the end of an era. When she stepped out of the room, closing the door behind her, the executive sat frozen, staring at the empty chair she had occupied moments before. None of them spoke. None of them moved. All they could do was wait for the storm that was about to hit. The next morning, the office buzzed with a mix of fear and disbelief. Word had spread quickly about what happened in the conference room the day before. Employees whispered in hallways, huddled around coffee machines, and exchanged wide-eyed glances. Some were skeptical. How could the janitor really take control of the company? Others felt a strange sense of hope blooming inside them. For years, they'd been ignored, overworked, and undervalued by the very people now sitting in limbo. If anyone could turn things around, maybe it was her. By 9 a.m., the auditors arrived. They walked in quietly but carried an air of authority that made everyone straighten up. Dressed in sharp suits and carrying briefcases stuffed with papers, they moved through the office like detectives on a mission. Their presence alone sent a clear message. This wasn't going to be a casual review. This was serious business. Meanwhile, the janitor, now interim CEO, was already hard at work. She didn't retreat to the luxurious corner office reserved for executives. Instead, she stayed in her usual spot near the supply closet, setting up a small desk where she could oversee operations without losing touch with the heart of the workplace. Her decision not to move into the executive suite didn't go unnoticed. To many employees, it was a powerful statement. She wasn't there to replace one kind of corruption with another. She was there to fix what was broken. As the day wore on, the auditors began their investigations. They combed through financial records, emails, and internal communications, piecing together the mess left behind by the ousted executives. Every document they reviewed painted a clearer picture of just how deep the rot went. Kickbacks, inflated budgets, falsified reports. It seemed no department had escaped unscathed. And as the evidence mounted, so did the tension among the suspended leaders. One by one, they were called into meetings with the auditors and the janitor herself. These weren't friendly chats. They were interrogations designed to get to the truth. Each executive sat across from her, sweating under the weight of her calm but piercing gaze. Some tried to defend themselves, offering weak excuses or blaming others. Others attempted to negotiate, promising to change if given another chance. But none of it worked. The janitor listened patiently, letting them speak until they ran out of words, then delivered the same verdict every time. Termination. It wasn't personal, at least not entirely. She knew these decisions would ripple through the company, affecting families and futures. But she also knew something else. Allowing corruption to fester would hurt far more people in the long run. With each dismissal, she reminded herself why she was doing this. Not for revenge, but for justice. By the end of the week, all but 2 of the top executives were gone. Those who remained, a young manager from marketing and a mid-level supervisor from HR, were chosen because their records showed potential. They hadn't been involved in the worst offenses, though they hadn't spoken out against them either. That silence came with consequences. Both were demoted to entry-level positions, forced to rebuild trust from the ground up. It was a harsh lesson, but a necessary one. With the old guard removed, the janitor turned her attention to the rest of the staff. She held a series of town hall meetings, inviting employees at every level to share their thoughts and concerns. At first, people were hesitant. Years of being dismissed or ignored had taught them to keep their heads down and avoid drawing attention to themselves. But when she insisted, genuinely asking for feedback and listening intently, they started opening up. Stories poured out. Tales of unfair treatment, missed promotions, toxic work environments, and promises broken. One woman recounted how she'd been passed over for a raise despite consistently exceeding expectations. A man shared how he'd been reprimanded for speaking up about unsafe working conditions. Another described the stress of juggling unrealistic deadlines while managers took credit for his ideas. Each story hit home, reinforcing. As the weeks turned into months, the janitor-turned-CEO continued to steer the company in a new direction. Change wasn't easy, and there were plenty of bumps along the way, but she tackled each challenge with the same quiet determination that had brought her this far. Her focus wasn't just on fixing what was broken, it was on building something better, something sustainable. She wanted to create a workplace where people felt valued, respected, and empowered to do their best work. One of her first big moves was introducing what she called Open Door Fridays. Every Friday afternoon, she made herself available to anyone who wanted to talk. No appointments, no formalities, just honest conversations. At first, employees were hesitant. After years of being ignored or brushed off by management, they weren't sure if this was genuine or just another empty gesture. But when they saw her sitting at her makeshift desk near the supply closet, patiently waiting for anyone to walk in, curiosity got the better of them. The first few Fridays were slow. Only a handful of brave souls showed up, mostly lower-level staff members who had little to lose. They came with small requests, a new printer for their department, better lighting in the break room, but stayed to share bigger concerns about workload, communication gaps, and lack of recognition. To their surprise, she listened intently, asked thoughtful questions, and followed through. Within days, the printer arrived, the lights were fixed, and an email went out thanking teams for their hard work. Word spread quickly. She actually meant what she said. By the third Friday, the line outside her door stretched down the hallway. Employees from every corner of the company poured in, eager to be heard. Some came with suggestions for improving processes. Others shared personal struggles that affected their performance at work. A young intern confessed he was overwhelmed juggling school and his job. An older employee revealed she'd been thinking of quitting because she felt invisible after decades of service. The janitor-turned-CEO didn't have all the answers, but she promised to help where she could, and she kept her word. She also introduced programs aimed at fostering growth and connection within the company. One initiative, called Skills Swap, encouraged employees to teach each other new skills during lunch breaks. A graphic designer taught basic Photoshop tricks, while an accountant offered tips on budgeting. It wasn't just practical, it brought people together, breaking down silos between departments and creating a sense of camaraderie. Another program focused on professional development. She partnered with local colleges to offer free workshops and courses for employees looking to advance their careers. For those interested in leadership roles, she created mentorship opportunities, pairing them with experienced managers, the ones who hadn't been fired, of course. These efforts weren't just about making employees more skilled. They were about showing them that the company cared about their future. But perhaps her most impactful move was addressing the culture of fear that had plagued the organization for so long. Under the old regime, speaking up often led to punishment rather than progress. Mistakes were hidden, not learned from, and collaboration was rare because everyone was too busy protecting themselves. She knew this mindset had to change if the company was going to thrive. To tackle this, she instituted a no-blame policy. If something went wrong, the goal wasn't to find someone to punish. It was to figure out what happened and how to prevent it in the future. Teams began holding regular debriefs after major projects, openly discussing what worked and what didn't without fear of retribution. Slowly, trust started to rebuild. People became more willing to take risks, knowing they wouldn't be crucified for failure as long as they learned from it. Her approach wasn't without its critics. Former allies of the ousted executives still grumbled about her methods, accusing her of being soft or naive. Some even tried to sabotage her efforts, spreading rumors or dragging their feet on implementing changes. But she handled these challenges with grace and resilience. When misinformation spread, she addressed it head-on, sharing transparent updates with the entire company. When resistance arose, she met with detractors privately, listening to their concerns and finding common ground wherever possible. What struck many employees most was how relatable she remained despite her newfound authority. She never acted like she was above anyone else. If someone spilled coffee on the floor, she grabbed a mop without hesitation. When the vending machine broke down, she rolled up her sleeves to fix it herself. These small acts might have seemed insignificant, but they spoke volumes about her character. She wasn't just leading from the top, she was leading by example. Over time, the transformation became undeniable. Morale soared as employees realized their voices mattered. Productivity increased because people were motivated to contribute, not just clock in and out. Even customers noticed the difference. Orders were processed faster, customer service improved, and complaints dropped significantly. The company's reputation began to recover, turning it from a cautionary tale into a model of ethical business practices. Still, the janitor-turned-CEO knew the road ahead wouldn't always be smooth. Rebuilding trust took time, and healing wounds required patience. But she was committed to seeing it through, not for accolades or recognition, but because she believed deeply in the power of doing what's right. And as she looked around the office, seeing smiles instead of scowls, teamwork instead of tension, she knew she was on the right path. This wasn't just a turnaround story. It was proof that leadership isn't about titles or degrees. It's about heart, integrity, and the courage to stand up for what matters. And in a world full of uncertainty, that was something worth believing in. As the company continued to rebuild under her leadership, the janitor-turned-CEO faced new challenges, ones that came not from within the office walls, but from outside. Word of her dramatic rise and the sweeping changes she'd made began to spread beyond the building. At first, it was just whispers in industry circles. People were intrigued by the story of a janitor stepping into the CEO role and firing the entire executive team. But soon, curiosity turned into headlines. Local newspapers picked up the story, dubbing her the Mop Queen in flashy, sensational articles. Television reporters camped outside the office, hoping to catch a glimpse of her walking in with her trusty mop bucket. Social media exploded with memes and debates about whether she was a hero or an anomaly. Some praised her as a symbol of justice and grassroots leadership, while others dismissed her as a fluke who got lucky. The attention was overwhelming, and not all of it was positive. At first, she tried to ignore the noise. Her focus remained on the employees and the work that needed to be done. She didn't give interviews or respond to critics, knowing that getting distracted by public opinion wouldn't help the company recover. But the scrutiny kept growing, and some of it started to affect morale. Former executives who had been fired launched smear campaigns accusing her of overstepping boundaries and lacking qualifications. They painted her as power-hungry, claiming she'd manipulated the board into giving her the job. The negative press hit hard. Employees who had initially rallied behind her began to feel uneasy. What if the public backlash hurt the company's reputation even more? What if clients lost faith in their ability to deliver? Doubts crept in, and for the first time since she took charge, cracks began to show in the unity she'd worked so hard to build. Realizing she couldn't stay silent forever, she decided to address the storm head-on. Instead of staging a flashy press conference or hiring a PR team, she did what felt most authentic. She invited journalists to tour the company themselves. She wanted them to see firsthand the progress being made and meet the people benefiting from the changes. It wasn't about defending herself. It was about letting the truth speak for itself. On the day of the tour, reporters filed into the office, notebooks and cameras in hand. They expected chaos, a struggling company barely holding itself together, under an inexperienced leader. What they found instead surprised them. The workspace buzzed with energy. Teams collaborated openly, sharing ideas and solving problems together. Employees greeted visitors warmly, eager to talk about how things had improved. One woman shared how flexible hours allowed her to care for her sick child without fear of losing her job. A young man explained how mentorship programs helped him gain confidence in his role. Everywhere they looked, there were signs of renewal and hope. After the tour, she gathered the reporters in the break room for a Q&A session. Sitting at a plain wooden table, she answered every question honestly, never shying away from tough topics. When asked about her qualifications, she smiled softly and said, "I may not have a fancy degree or years of experience in boardrooms, but I know this company better than anyone. I've seen its strengths and weaknesses up close, and I care deeply about the people who keep it running." When challenged about accusations of manipulation, she leaned forward, her voice steady but firm. "If standing up against corruption and fighting for fairness makes me manipulative, then yes, I'm guilty. But if you're asking whether I forced the board to appoint me, the answer is no. They chose me because they saw the evidence I presented and recognized the need for change. This isn't about me. It's about doing what's right for the company and everyone who depends on it." Her hones. As the months rolled on, the company's transformation became undeniable. What had once been a sinking ship was now sailing smoothly, thanks to the steady hand of its unlikely captain. The janitor turned CEO had proven that leadership isn't about titles or appearances. It's about action and integrity. And her actions spoke louder than any words ever could. One of the biggest changes she implemented was in how decisions were made. Gone were the days when a small group of executives sat in a closed room, making choices that affected everyone without consulting those who would actually carry them out. Instead, she introduced something she called decision circles. These were open forums where employees from different departments came together to discuss challenges and brainstorm solutions. Everyone's voice mattered, whether you were an intern fresh out of college or a seasoned manager with decades of experience. At first, some people were hesitant to speak up. They'd spent so long being told what to do that offering input felt strange, even risky. But she encouraged them, reminding them that good ideas can come from anywhere. Soon the sessions became lively and productive. A warehouse worker suggested rearranging storage shelves to improve efficiency, and it cut delivery times by 20%. A receptionist proposed a new system for managing client calls, which led to faster response rates and happier customers. Each success reinforced the idea that collaboration wasn't just nice to have, it was essential. She also tackled one of the biggest issues employees had complained about: work-life balance. For years, they'd been expected to put in long hours, sacrificing time with their families and personal well-being for the sake of the company. Burnout was rampant, and turnover rates reflected it. To address this, she introduced flexible scheduling and remote work options, trusting her team to manage their responsibilities without micromanagement. She believed that if you treated people like adults, they'd act like adults, and she was right. The results were remarkable. Productivity soared as employees worked smarter, not harder. Absenteeism dropped because people weren't running themselves into the ground anymore. Even the office atmosphere changed. Laughter replaced tension, and conversations flowed freely between colleagues who used to barely nod at each other in passing. It wasn't perfect. There were still tough days and difficult tasks, but there was a sense of shared purpose that hadn't existed before. Her efforts extended beyond the workplace too. She knew that businesses don't exist in isolation. They're part of communities. So she launched initiatives aimed at giving back. The company partnered with local charities, sponsoring food drives, school supply donations, and job training, programs for underprivileged youth. Employees were given paid volunteer days to participate in these efforts, and many jumped at the chance to make a difference outside the office walls. One employee later said, "It feels good to know we're not just making money, we're making lives better." Of course, not everything went smoothly. There were moments when old habits threatened to creep back in. Some managers struggled to adapt to the new culture of openness and accountability. A few tried to cling to their old ways, hoarding information, or resisting change. When this happened, she didn't hesitate to step in. She reminded them gently but firmly that the company's future depended on everyone embracing the new direction. If they couldn't, they weren't the right fit, and she wouldn't compromise on that. Despite these occasional hiccups, the overall trajectory was upward. Profits climbed steadily, fueled by increased efficiency, higher customer satisfaction, and renewed employee engagement. Clients noticed the difference too. Orders poured in, partnerships strengthened, and competitors began to take notice, not just of the company's financial success, but of its reputation as a fair and ethical player in the industry. Awards followed, recognizing the company's achievements in innovation, workplace culture, and social responsibility. At award ceremonies, she stood quietly off to the side, letting her team bask in the spotlight. When asked to give speeches, she kept them short and humble, always redirecting credit to the people who had made it all possible. "This isn't my story," she'd say, "it's ours." But perhaps the most meaningful validation came from within the company itself. Employees started referring to her not as the CEO or the boss, but as the heart of this place. They saw her rolling up her sleeves alongside them, celebrating their wins, and supporting them through setbacks. She wasn't just leading the company, she was part of it, woven into its fabric in a way no executive had been before. By the end of her second year in charge, the company had transformed completely. Where there had once been chaos, there was now clarity. Where there had been fear, there was trust, and where there had been despair, there was hope. People looked forward to coming to work, knowing they were valued not just as workers but as human beings. For her part, she remained grounded. She still wore her uniform some days, picking up a mop or helping unload deliveries when things got busy. She refused to move into the corner office, saying it felt too far removed from the action. Her humility only deepened the respect people had for her. They knew she wasn't in it for glory or power. She was in it because she cared. As she walked through the office one evening, watching teams collaborate and hearing laughter echo down the hallways, she allowed herself a rare moment of pride. This wasn't just a company anymore, it was a community. And while the road ahead would undoubtedly bring more challenges, she knew they could face anything together. After all, they'd already proven that even the toughest stains can be cleaned, with enough determination and heart. Years passed, and the company continued to thrive under her leadership. It wasn't just surviving, it was flourishing in ways no one could have predicted. Profits soared, employee satisfaction hit record highs, and customers raved about the quality of service they received. The business became a shining example of what happens when integrity meets hard work. But for the janitor turned CEO, success wasn't measured by numbers or awards. It was measured by the lives she had touched along the way. One crisp autumn morning, she gathered everyone in the main hall for an announcement. Employees filed in, chatting excitedly, curious about what this meeting might bring. Some speculated it could be another milestone, a new client, a major expansion, maybe even an IPO. But as she stepped up to the podium, her expression gave nothing away. "Thank you all for being here," she began, her voice warm but tinged with emotion. "I want to start by saying how proud I am of what we've built together. When I first walked into that conference room years ago, I didn't know if anyone would believe in me or in us. But you did. You trusted me, and more importantly, you trusted each other. And because of that, we turned a broken company into something truly special." The room fell silent as people leaned forward, sensing this wasn't just another routine update. She took a deep breath before continuing. "But today I'm here to tell you something personal. After decades of working tirelessly for this company and for all of you, I've decided it's time for me to step aside." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. For a moment, no one moved or spoke. Then murmurs erupted. disbelief mixing with sadness. How could she leave now, after everything she'd done? Who would take her place? What would happen next? She held up a hand to quiet the room, her calm demeanor steadying the chaos. "This isn't goodbye," she assured them. "It's simply my turn to pass the torch. I've spent years fighting battles, fixing problems, and building foundations. Now it's your turn to carry that forward. You don't need me anymore, not like you used to. This company has grown stronger than I ever imagined, and it's because of you." Her words struck a chord. People nodded slowly, beginning to understand. She wasn't abandoning them, she was empowering them. Still, the thought of moving forward without her felt daunting. She had been their anchor, their guiding light. How do you replace someone who changed everything? To ease the transition, she announced that 2 rising stars within the company would take over as co-CEOs. Both had started in entry-level positions and risen through the ranks thanks to her mentorship programs. They were smart, dedicated, and deeply committed to the values she'd instilled. "They'll lead differently than I did," she said with a smile. "And that's a good thing. Every generation brings something new to the table. Trust them, support them, and keep pushing boundaries." When the meeting ended, employees lingered, reluctant to let the moment slip away. Some approached her individually to thank her, tears streaming down their faces. Others hugged her tightly, unsure how to express what she meant to them. One older worker, who had been on the verge of quitting when she first arrived, handed her a small card signed by nearly everyone in the office. Inside it read, "You reminded us that greatness comes from the heart. Thank you for showing us the way." Her final weeks at the company were bittersweet. She spent her days mentoring the new leaders, sharing stories and offering advice. She also made sure to visit every department, thanking people personally for their contributions. On her last day, she walked through the halls one last time, mop in hand, stopping to chat with familiar faces. It was fitting. She was leaving the same way she'd come in, quietly and humbly, yet leaving an indelible mark. As she stepped out of the building for the final time, applause erupted behind her.